Hey, greetings, everyone. Welcome. It's Naomi Wolf with Outspoken on Substack and on Daily Clout. And I've got a really extraordinary guest with us today, Miranda Spivak. Ms. Spivak has had a very distinguished career and continues to. She's a veteran reporter and editor who spent 20 years at the Washington Post, covering the gap between what governments promise and what they actually do. She's the author of Backroom Deals in Our Backyards, The New Press, winner of the Studs and Ida Turkle Award, a book that follows 5 ordinary people, non-lawyers and non-journalists who stumbled onto buried government deals involving toxic water, dangerous roads, poisoned firefighter gear, good heavens, secret criminal justice algorithms, and corporate NDAs, and figured out how to fight back. A former Fulbright scholar in North Macedonia and a distinguished visiting professor of journalism at DePauw University, she writes the weekly newsletter Backroom Deals, Substack.com, and is a sought-after speaker on government transparency, the collapse of local news, and what democracy looks like when no one is watching. So very many important qualifications, of much interest to our audience especially. So welcome, Ms. Spivak. We're really happy to have you.
Thanks very much. You can call me Miranda. We don't have to be that formal.
Thank you, Miranda. Please call me Naomi. Well, let's get started with this latest book. And by the way, I'm a New Press fan. I hope still friends with your publisher post cancellation. I admire her very much, and I admire what she did with the New Press very much. So tell me about, let's see, you initially wanted to talk about data centers, which was very interesting. And I assume that was one of the examples in your book that most recently came out.
I have to say it's mentioned somewhat peripherally. The book came out, I think the whole data center debate has really taken off in the last 12 months or so. The book was out in May of 2025, so it's mentioned in passing. I can certainly talk much more about it now, I think, than I could when I was writing the book in 2023. So I don't know if that's where you want to start, or if you want to just start about, state and local secrecy in general and how harmful that is to us all.
Well, I guess I'd like to use the data centers example to pivot to transparency and local news was
sure.
My understanding of what your favorite focus was just now. So before we get into that, please tell me what led you to write that book, such an important subject.
It's a very interesting topic to me, and one which is secrecy at the state and local level and its harm. And it was actually several years back when I was still at the Washington Post, and I was covering Prince George's County, Maryland, which has its own long history of scandal in government. And I was just trying to get something simple, or I thought it was simple, which were outside contracts that the government had with, people, all kinds of people. And of course, the reason you want to look at outside contracts, and this is something people should be doing in every community, is because there's all kinds of opportunity for graft, corruption, favoritism. The mayor's brother-in-law gets a contract. Some favored vendor gets a contract even when they've failed over and over to deliver. So, it's sort of general. To me, it's somewhat basic reporting. And again, it's not just something journalists can do, but people can do in their own communities. So I was getting stonewalled. And I know the Maryland Public Records Act backwards and forwards. And I knew I was entitled to this information, and I was just getting stonewalled. Anyway,
Can I jump in for just a minute, Miranda? When you say you were getting stonewalled, I mean, there are so many ways for one to be stonewalled as a reporter.
That's true.
Who was doing what to you?
So this was actually, I was looking at the county council, which is an elected body, and they had their own outside contracts. The government writ large also has outside contracts, but I was looking at a pretty narrow group. And there was a lawyer for that group, the county council, who just kept saying no, or we can't find them, or you're going to have to pay a lot of money for it. I mean, there were lots of different ways you get stonewalled. Often fees, actually, that governments try to charge are a big deterrent to people. Anyway, long story short, we had firepower at the Washington Post. We had a great inside lawyer who's still there, actually, Jim McLaughlin, and he had to really fight for this. And we did end up paying, which most people can't do. But I got the documents, and of course, they showed all kinds of shenanigans. Anyway, eventually that led me, because I was being stonewalled on other requests for information, led me to really think hard, not just about journalists who have some skills and experience, but ordinary people, for lack of a better word. And I don't mean that pejoratively, but just people who aren't fluent in this, who don't really know that there is a lot of information they're entitled to get from their government, which actually their tax dollars have already paid for. Right. And it just led me to wonder, if I was having such a hard time, what was it like for other people who don't do this as a regular practice and who encounter a problem in their community. And so this is several years later, but it led me to write a series for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, which is called State Secrets, which of course is a play on words, and eventually led me to still want to write the book. I just felt that I hadn't explored the issue enough. And there were lots of stories in communities all over the country where people, neophytes, not experts, were going after information and having a hard time. So it was really, started from my own experience, which a lot of news stories actually do, as you know, but, leads you beyond that. So that was the genesis.
What a powerful explanation. So what comes to mind as you're speaking, Miranda, is all those records, you said they're already paid for, which is by our tax dollars, which is 100% correct. Don't they also legally belong to us already?
Well, they do. They do. There are some exemptions, both in federal public records laws, which is called the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with, and similar laws at the state level, and they do belong to us. There's certain things that I think it's fair to say we should not get. For example, the map of the electric grid. Maybe we don't want that in the hands of regular people, and who else it might get to. There are security issues. There's sometimes criminal investigations that are ongoing. We're not going to get that information, at least not at the outset. But the vast majority of material that governments collect, and they're collecting it from you, by the way, they're asking you to pay taxes, they're asking you to answer surveys, whatever. The vast majority of that material does belong to us. And the way it could be solved way more easily than it is if governments could do what's called proactive disclosure. They're all digitized now. They could put a lot of this stuff up on the web, and those pesky members of the public would find it and not have to bug them.
Exactly. That was my second question. By the way, already Cal1 Calendar 2761 says #thank you very much. People really appreciate this kind of, journalism, right? This is old-fashioned, shoe leather journalism, in effect. My follow-up question was, it is crazy, I guess that's not really a question, isn't it crazy that you were asked, or the Washington Post was asked, to pay fees for what should be digitized by now, right? There's no overhead and just there's like hosting, right?
I will say this in defense, to the extent that I can defend local and state governments, which is not easy. A lot of them are underfunded. I would not say that was the case where I was being asked to pay, but smaller communities, stuff is not digitized. A lot of courts in this country have not digitized. This is a political decision that legislatures need to make, which is that in the long run, if you digitize all your documents and past history, it will pay off because it's just much more efficient. Okay, so they can't do that. Maybe in your community, they are choosing between putting a new roof on the public elementary school and paying somebody to look for public documents. They're going to obviously go with the new roof. I get that. So there are funding questions, but as a sort of culture, there are also problems where state and local governments, and we can't even talk about the federal government at this point, which is a complete black hole on information, but state and local governments, the culture is, when in doubt, don't give it out, basically.
Right. Definitely. I'm sure that's true. So wrong. So did you have to FOIA the information, or did you ultimately pay a fee and get it?
Well, I had to FOIA it in Maryland. It's called the Maryland Public Information Act. It's the same thing. And Maryland's actually one of the worst states because it gives government entities 30 days to respond, which they can then stretch out. And the federal government is 20 days, and many states are 10 days, at least to give some kind of acknowledgement of your request. But we did pay for it. I think it was $500. And, I mean, okay, the Post, at least then, we won't talk about it now, but the Post then would pay for that. And, it was annoying, but we could do it. But most people can't do that and shouldn't be asked to.
Shouldn't be asked to. Wow, this is profound. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been told, okay, you can have these records, but it'll cost $1,250.
Yeah. Oh, God, tens of thousands in many cases.
Yeah, that's really shocking. So does that relate to the data center?
Well, it does. It does, because what's happening with the data centers, which I hope people understand what they are, but they are these behemoth buildings filled with computers that are frankly powering your iPhone and lots of other things. So, I think we have a dilemma, which is we want all these things, but we don't want data centers because they're big, they're noisy, they pollute, they don't create a lot of jobs. So what's been happening with that around, and Virginia has been the epicenter of this, but it's spreading all over the country. Local governments are being asked to sign non-disclosure agreements very early in the process.
Whoa.
I mean, what's that all about?
How can you do that? How can they legally sign an private company?
It's a very good question. And I think somebody actually has to go to court and challenge that, because it is happening around the country. And what's happening is these we're talking Amazon, Microsoft, all the big creators of data centers and their contractors are going around the country getting, a fix on property, and they need a lot of acreage for these things. And a lot of them are being right near, residential neighborhoods, and they're noisy and they spew out a lot of hot air. And so naturally, communities are going to be a little skeptical, even though they may understand to some degree the need for it, because, as I said, everybody has a phone and we're all very reliant on the internet now. So they're being, no, that's okay. Public officials are being asked to sign NDAs even before a deal is done. And so what happened, for example, in Virginia was, several communities were just completely left in the dark. Their local government bought into this idea that they couldn't talk about what was going on. Again, it's your tax money. They're giving tax breaks to Amazon and others. They're buying land cheaper, whatever it is, they're getting a deal, and the public is being left out until the very last minute. And then, of course, it's very hard to object.
Good heavens. I mean, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of how, in a way, being made to sign an NDA is a dream come true for a lot of government officials who don't want accountability and don't want transparency, right? And it's a complete game changer. I mean, one big reason, I'm not saying anything you haven't written a book about, but without the transparency and the laws compelling transparency that we have in the United States, we would be a banana republic. We wouldn't be any kind of democracy. And there's no way to continue as a democracy if we lose that transparency. But an NDA with a private company covering our representatives basically does an end run around democracy itself.
Totally.
Say more about that.
Well, let's talk about Amazon and its hunt for its second headquarters, which was well covered around the country. We knew that they were going into all these different cities, ultimately ended up in Arlington, Virginia, after getting sort of shut out of Long Island City in New York because of community objections. So Amazon goes around and says, well, we might come to your town and, allegedly we're going to create a lot of jobs. That has not turned out to be true in Arlington, Virginia. And by the way, if you even want us to consider you, we want you to sign an NDA. And most governments did that.
Wow.
And and they even don't even have a guarantee, obviously, that they were going to get the second headquarters. And the NDAs encompassed everything. Like, okay, here's the deal. We're going to give Amazon, this behemoth company that frankly could be doing a lot more for the common good than it does. And so we're going to give away tax breaks. We're going to let them locate over here. We're not going to tell you about it. And that really opened my eyes to the widespread use of NDAs. And then the data center issue came along pretty quickly thereafter. I mean, it had been brewing for a long time, but I think in terms of public awareness, it's more recent. And these NDAs are being signed all over the place. And again, with no guarantee that these companies are going to come in, just they're going to consider your location.
Yeah, but once you've signed an NDA, anything is possible. I mean, one of the things that's occurring to me as you're speaking is I remember I live in New York half the time, and I remember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez objecting to the positioning or the establishment of an Amazon center in Long Island City,
in
the Bronx. I think that was proposed at one point. And I was thinking, why would she do that? And then they went away. And now she has, I think last I saw, $30 million somehow. An NDA would cover, I'm not saying this happened, but an NDA could cover relationships, consultancies, future agreements, share transactions between elected officials and corporations that right now are forbidden by the transparency and conflict of interest laws we have that prevent those kind of relationships. Is that not correct?
Well, I think if we're going to talk about Congress, as you know, it's a little bit different because the campaign finance laws really do require a fair amount of transparency. Of course, there are all these political action committees that are involved with dark money, and their collections are not transparent. If she got money from Amazon for her campaign, we would know that eventually. But you're not talking.
Not talking about that. I'm saying that theoretically, if you've got an NDA, if I have an NDA with a private company and I'm in office, theoretically, I could have an agreement that when I leave office, I get shares of Amazon stock.
Yeah.
And there's no way for my constituents to see that, or for the Washington Post to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I don't feel totally fluent in a way in answering your question, because I do think for elected officials to sign an NDA, not because, they are trying, I mean, they would have to be doing some kind of business, it seems to me, with this company. And I'm not sure that would apply to Congress as much as it does at the state and local level, where economic development is really the coin of the realm, and real estate deals are really the coin of the realm. I mean, if she or any other elected official were out there just doing some deal because they're investing in something, it would be possible. Certainly, what President Trump is doing, for example, on crypto and other things where he's just completely ignoring the conflict of interest rules. I mean, that's sort of another example, I think, of this kind of grift that can occur.
Sure. On both sides of the aisle, our elected officials are bizarrely wealthy.
And lack of transparency is nonpartisan. Right. Everybody does it.
Well, let me not speculate, except to say that when I was a White House spouse back in the Clinton years, we had to put everything we owned in a blind trust for exactly this reason, so that my then husband, who was a White House speechwriter, we would know what the president would be talking about. If he's talking about Apple next week, it would be so easy not that we would do that, but so easy for unscrupulous people to speculate or invest based on what they knew was coming down the pipeline. And it seems like those laws have gone the way of the dodo, or been weakened. But let me stick to what you're focused on, which is state and local transparency. You tell me, instead of my hypotheticals, you tell me what you think is the downside for citizens of the fact that these data centers are offering these NDAs and other things that you've uncovered.
Yeah, well, I think that what happens, if you want to, specifically, we can talk about data centers. So they are sneaking in the dead of night, for lack of a better way to put it. And local governments believe that they want them. There is a lot of dispute about how many good paying jobs they really will create. They will create construction and electrical jobs at the outset.
Right.
How much of that goes on after it's built is very debatable. But lots of communities are looking for ways to shore up their tax base without perhaps burdening the public schools. So if you built an apartment building, that's different from building a data center where people aren't necessarily living and creating small people who would go to the schools. So these are the kinds of, I think, dilemmas that local communities have. But the idea that their hand is being forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement before they, and then they can't tell their constituents that they're doing this. I mean, who knows what's being given?
When credible doctors start paying attention to purposed medications, it's really worth asking why. Dr. Harvey Risch, who's a friend of mine, I adore him, a friend of mine and Brian's, former professor of epidemiology at Yale, and now serving on the president's cancer panel, is helping lead that conversation. A new groundbreaking observational study from the wellness company analyzed the off-label use of ivermectin and mebendazole in nearly 200 cancer patients treated by licensed doctors across cancers such as breast, prostate, lung, and colon cancers. And the results are hard to ignore. After 6 months, 84% of patients experienced clinical benefit, including stable disease, tumor regression, no evidence of disease. This is not lab data. This is real-world patient experience. Dr. Risch, chief epidemiologist at the wellness company, called it an exciting signal deserving serious scientific investigation and more accessible, lower-cost cancer care options. God knows. I have some loved ones who are going through cancer treatment right now, and did you know it's the only treatment in which the oncologist gets a cut of the chemotherapy? It's shocking. Perverse incentives. That is why the wellness company makes it easy to access an ivermectin and mebendazole formula using medications that are FDA approved for other indications and are being studied for additional use. That's what a second purpose means. It is doctor prescribed and USA compounded, so no weird overseas supply chain, designed to support these patients exploring these emerging approaches under medical guidance. Ordering is simple and fully digital. Just fill out a quick intake form, a licensed doctor reviews it, and your prescription ships directly to your door. Head to dailyclouthealth.com. Again, that's dailyclouthealth.com, and use code DAILYCLOUT to save up to $60 off plus free shipping. You guys have to do it.
Away.
Exactly.
Put pressure on water, on electrical systems, which the ratepayers in Virginia feel like they are bearing the burden for that, not the companies. Now, if the companies were to come in and say, hey, we're going to cover our electrical costs and water costs, and we're going to create our own water sources somehow, maybe people would feel a little bit differently, but these things are putting a lot of pressure on communities. And what's the payoff for the community? Not so great.
Right. And we don't know what the future is, right? As we're learning with solar farms, and I'm a big green energy supporter, when solar was rolled out and ate up all those acres of farmland, we weren't really told up front, these have a lifespan of 10 to 15 years. Yeah. And they're going to drop everyone's property values in the surrounding area and involve a ton of cleanup. Let me just jump in here with Autumn Smith, who's a citizen reporter of considerable distinction in Minneapolis. And so she says, my city also moved FOIA control from the city clerk's office to the city attorney office. Oh my gosh. So you're up against their lawyers to start out with. She said, I FOIA'd conflict of interest between township attorney and Michigan EGLE, I'm not sure who that is, who's pushing data centers. And it was $7,000 to FOIA. Also, many local officials have signed NDAs in regard to EV battery plants, data centers, solar, etc. She also says, yes, Then the very local officials that signed NDAs got elected to Lansing and made signing NDAs illegal after they signed them. Wow. And then she lists her article, good for you. And then she says, oh no, that's someone else. We'll go back to that. This is so interesting. 8 of 9 city commissioners signed NDAs along with city manager, assistant city manager, and other department heads. And then you said something about a quid pro quo somewhere, Autumn, that people get paid in transactions like, oh my gosh, she said, my town is providing over 1 million gallons of municipal water to an EV battery plant every day to an EV battery plant. And oh, here it is. This is the last thing I'll read for a minute or for a while, Autumn. NDAs, money, promises of future jobs, contracts, project bid rigging, quid pro quo. So she's a no holds barred, hard-boiled local reporter. She's a cooperating witness right now with an FBI investigation, which is very interesting. And she is not holding back on what the arrangements can look like. But the point is, whether they do or not, they can. And that is giant taking of the power away from the people. And also, I was going to say to you, taking leverage away from the negotiators at the table, right? Because once you sign NDA, you can't say, well, I'd love to, but my constituents are bothering out of me. So sorry.
Right.
More.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a growing problem across the country. Obviously, data centers is, as Autumn says, only one of the places where these things are being required by corporate interests. And I think states really need to look hard at whether they can outlaw them. I think they can. I don't think there's a First Amendment problem with that. I think it's actually the opposite. I think it's squashing the First Amendment by doing that. So I think it's something to look at, but that is not a popular position for a legislator to take necessarily when they're so reliant on campaign finance, donations, et cetera. And in states and localities, the biggest donors generally are real estate interests. So that's, it's not you and me, it's everybody else.
Well, let me ask you, what is the reason, if your reporting revealed this, that these data centers they're seeking to put them on fertile, beautiful, scenic land instead of the many acres of wilderness? Is it that they need water? Is that the reason?
They need water and access to the electrical grid. And so open land is easier to install the infrastructure. They're also moving, and this was interesting to me. I did do a story several years ago about this for the New York Times, but they are now moving away from the coast, which is actually where a lot of the internet infrastructure comes in, both Pacific Coast and the East Coast. And they are able to move inland now because things have gotten more sophisticated, which means, there's a lot more open land, probably in the middle of the country, a lot of farmland that may be converted. I will say this about my own skepticism about data centers, which is, I think in about 10 years, it's all going to be up in Starlink or somewhere. And then you're going to have these big buildings that are white elephants. What are we going to use them for? Detention centers? I mean, what are we building here?
Right. Yeah, no, that's very prescient. And you're right. And we're living through that with the death of the mall, right? These giant strip malls defacing our country that have come to the end of their life because, the internet took over selling shoes and they are not easily converted to anything else. You never get those beautiful, pristine acres back. Well, let me ask you, are there other examples? Your structure of your book followed 5 stories, I believe. Are there other examples you want to throw out of citizens who were not deterred, who tried to fight back, and how they did so?
Yes. So the issues in the book focus on failing sewer systems. I mean, this is really, stuff that really happens in real communities. Poison drinking water.
Oh my.
A loophole in federal law that allows states to keep secret what is the most dangerous intersection in your state.
Oh,
Gee, I might want to know that. I might want to route the school bus. If I'm working in a school system, I want to route the school bus away from that intersection.
yeah.
But the state can keep that secret. There's also hidden algorithms used in the criminal justice system. And then the other one is poisons, which is forever chemicals in firefighter turnout gear, which I will say that person, Diane Cotter, has been able to spark a national movement to get rid of this in firefighter gear, because you may know that the rate of cancer in the fire service is higher than the national rate. And so they're looking at all kinds of ways. And obviously, fighting a fire is very dangerous. There are a lot of toxins, both in wildland fire and also if you're in a building, because of all the chemicals that we've used in furniture, et cetera. But she's also figured this out about the gear that the firefighters wear that's supposed to protect them. Turns out it may also be poisoning them. There's no absolute cause and effect, but it's certainly been a big issue. But anyway, what happened with all these different stories is, for example, in poison drinking water, a guy named Michael Hickey, he's in Hoosick Falls, New York. His father dies of a rare form of cancer. He's obviously bereft and starts to get on the internet to sort of look into this and discovers this whole problem with forever chemicals. And this is really more than 10 years ago. So again, not an issue that had been in the public consciousness as much as it is now, and goes through all kinds of travails to try to get the community, to get the local officials to buy into the idea that maybe they need to look at the factories that are using Teflon essentially, and that maybe this has polluted the water. Long saga, lots of fighting for public records. The other thing I think that happens to people who are what Michael actually coined this term, and I've used it a lot in the book, accidental activists. Nobody signs up for this. And it's a second job usually to try to unravel these problems in your community. But, he took a lot of grief from people once it all came out, and the EPA and the Cuomo administration finally admitted that there was a problem. People in his community either said, "Why did you not tell us sooner?" Or in the case of the mayor, he said, "Don't tell anybody because it's going to give us a bad reputation." So you're always sort of caught it's a thankless job, but these people are very tenacious, very determined, and they're brave, I think. And so another issue is this failing sewer system in a small, historically Black town in Alabama. This issue is not resolved. I'm still trying to find another way to write about this because it's still pretty outrageous. But all kinds of levels of secrecy where the community is trying to find out why $30 million in federal funds has been spent to help a community of 2,000 people, and it's still not solved. One might wonder that somebody is raking off money. I can't prove that yet, but they're just weird stuff. No explanation of where the money's going. The community's kept in the dark. The people who are concerned about it are kept off the boards and commissions that might have oversight of this. There's a real effort there to really clamp down on any dissent. And then another one that to me is very interesting is the use of
yes. You go on to the next example. Sorry to interrupt. What is a failing sewer system?
Good question. I can explain in great detail, but I won't. It's basically, these are well and septic systems that are rural, what is used in a lot of rural communities. And the septic systems are overflowing, which means the detritus is getting in somebody's yard. Sometimes the water system that is delivering the water, some of it's public, some of it's private, those are leaking, those are failing. But basically, when I first went to Uniontown, Alabama to see all this and talk to people, I really honestly felt I had entered a third world country. Was terrible.
Like, could you perceive or smell
You could smell it. You could see it. It's pretty bad. And that's been going on for years. And the state government has kind of looked the other way. There are companies in town that probably are contributing to overflows and overburdening the sewer system. And to me, the most shocking thing is that a lot of money has been spent to fix this and it hasn't been fixed. I mean, this is not rocket science. I'm not a sewer expert, but it's not rocket science.
So would you conclude that financial corruption is the number one driver of this opacity that you've uncovered?
You know, I think it's two things. I think you can never underestimate incompetence. Seriously. I mean, you just cannot underestimate that. And then, yes, what happens is the regulators at the state level, the environmental regulators, again, worried about jobs. Do we really want to shut down the catfish plant in Uniontown that's providing 200 jobs? Yeah, maybe they're overburdening the system, but maybe we can fix that. And so, it's a mix. I mean, I am sure there is out and out corruption in a lot of these cases, but I'm also sure that you have systems that local oversight is pretty ineffective.
Right. Wow. Do you propose legislative solutions at the end of your book, or what's your...
Yeah, that's a good question. The end of the book, the last chapter is called A Playbook for Accidental Activists. I am not I'm not super optimistic about legislatures as they now are composed of who they're composed of.
Right, they're the ones who are opaque. Yeah, you're right.
But I do think citizens really getting engaged. And I know that's hard. I mean, if you're raising children and you've got 2 full-time jobs in the household, and I know it's hard, but I really think people need to learn about how their local governments work. They need to show up before they need something. So go to the city council and just listen and learn who's pulling the levers of power. Try to educate yourself, because someday there will be an issue that you really need help on, and you need to know what the system is and who's in charge on paper and in reality, which could be 2 different things. So I'm really encouraging participatory democracy.
Interesting. And I must ask, because I see this everywhere as like the weak point. People are willing, but literally don't know how to begin or how to organize. Right. What's the most effective way you've seen citizens lobby or use their power?
Usually, I mean, they become self-educated, although you can get help, whether it's the American Civil Liberties Union, for example, or some nonprofit that's working on environmental issues or education issues or health issues, whatever your issue is. I think you have to go into the legislature pretty well educated about the issue. And you also have to show strength in numbers. So for example, if 2 people show up and say, hey, we've got a sewer system problem in my town, nobody's going to pay attention. But if you can show that there are, 50 people in your neighborhood who are suffering, and here are their names and signatures on this letter, and they are willing to be vocal, I think that makes a big difference. I think strength in numbers and really knowing your topic well, and then also offering solutions, because I think elected officials deal with a lot of different issues. They're not experts in any one necessarily. And so if you can figure out what they need to do to solve the problem, so much the better.
That is a fantastic answer. I think about this question all the time, and actually wrote a book long ago, on a national level, basically with the goal of giving people a handbook for activists. And I did not reach these 3 concise conclusions the way you did. And so I really credit you for that. That's really important. So now pivoting to the second subject I wanted to cover, in the past, your local newspaper would have covered these scandals, this opacity, sit in on those city council meetings, report on them, and people wouldn't have to have a second or third job trying to piece it all together as non-journalists. You have talked about, as you should, it's the missing piece, the death of local journalism. Please say more about that.
Yeah. No, I think you've hit on a real threat to democracy, and one that, despite there's a lot of chatter now out in the atmosphere, there's a lot of philanthropy now to try to help shore up or create new sources of local news. I'm all for that. I'm certainly think that's great, but it's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we really have to do is understand, first of all, just as you said, the local reporter was the community watchdog. They were the stand-in for the person who couldn't show up at the meeting. And they were there at midnight, which is when all the stuff really goes down. I mean, I've seen it.
Literally? Are you saying literally at midnight? Is that a metaphor? Or are you saying
no, I'm saying literally at midnight, because I have sat through planning board meetings, city council meetings, whatever, and often they wait till the public is worn out and leaves. Or in the case of, a lot of it's on Zoom now, which is actually not so great. But no, I mean, literally, the local reporter would be there and know what had happened and could write about it. And that has disappeared. It's also, I mean, when I was at the Washington Post, I will say this is the old Post. I can't even comment on the new Post, but, we had a pretty strong local news desk, but it wasn't fashionable. Mm-hmm. Everybody, I mean, people would look at me and say, why do you want to keep writing about local stuff? And I was like, well, there are 5 million people in the Washington area. Billions of dollars are being spent in public money on state and local schools, whatever, industry. And I think people are, should know about that. And I'm interested in it too, because I think there are great stories out there. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it just, so you have two things. One is, I think, a status problem in journalism. Mm-hmm. And the other is that, a lot of people who might be starting out really don't want to go to these communities, or they're not of the communities. So there's some interesting solutions out there. There's a group called Documenters, which is out of Chicago, which is training citizen journalists to show up and be able to write about what's going on and try to understand it. But I think, what I found with the people that I was writing about who were trying to crack the code of state and local secrecy was that they were using social media to communicate. Obviously, it's not a reliable source in my view, but it's certainly one way to get the word out about your issue. And then I think people are going to have to step in, because there is not enough really localized journalism going on. So if you are worried, as you should be, you have to show up, or you have to organize your community so people take turns showing up.
Interesting. So, Autumn Smith points out that she is the only person in her community that reports local ongoing corruption, and she actually had charges brought against her for doing so. You'll have to remind us what the charges were, Autumn, because I'm sure they didn't say we're putting you in jail for reporting. But she says if you're not pro-city propaganda, they retaliate against you. Yeah. I can't speak to that. I mean, I'm sure some states are worse than others, but I can follow up with a question for you, Miranda, which is what business model, right? Like the business model of cars and jobs, which used to fuel, the want ads, which used to fuel local journalism,
right,
no longer exists because of cars.com and Indeed.com and, the internet, basically. So have you answered the, gigantic question of how to fund local journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be a combination. I am actually leery of state aid to local journalism, because I think ultimately they're going to ask for something in return. I know this is going on in New Jersey and actually California. I commend the thought, but I'm not sure it's the right way to go. So here's the deal. At least in the big cities, people are spending $5 a day at Starbucks or some other fancy coffee place, maybe more. Right? So what is that? $25 a week, $100 a month. You can't tell me that you can't pony up $30 a month to a local news organization or to your NPR station.
Please. I'm sorry.
Whatever. I mean, that's local news, unfortunately.
Got it. Like, we don't have to have an argument about this, but I come from the left. I've been a liberal my whole life. The lies and propaganda that have emerged in the last, 5 or 6 years from a lot of legacy news outlets are very disheartening.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I'm not, you're right. We're not going to argue about it. But I do think that in many communities, that's all that's left. So if you want to support them, to influence them, to try to direct their coverage, whatever, I think people have to be willing to pay for local news. And then,
No, I agree, but which
yeah,
local news? I mean, I'm not trying
well,
to badger, but I just want
yeah,
to look at some
yeah.
really.
Well, I mean, I think people are going to have to do their own evaluations. I can't single-handedly point to it, but for example, I live in the DC area, so the Baltimore Banner, which was started by a wealthy hotel magnate who, to the extent that I understand how they're operating, has left them alone and given them a lot of money. But they also have a subscription model, and I think a subscription model is okay. I think people gotten used to the idea that information is free. Well, if you want good, verifiable information, I think you need to be willing to pay for it. And I don't think it's that much if you're spending $5 a day on coffee.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I just wanted to note, something that I think is very cynical is that a couple of big opaque corporations, right up your alley of opacity, systematically went in and bought up publications like the Bangor Daily News and the Baltimore Sun. And they publish, but now it's on baltimore.com or maine.com.
Yeah.
And it's so interpenetrated with advertising and kind of unclear agendas, like who's paying. I don't think that's the kind of independent journalism that you're describing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think people have to evaluate local journalism themselves. I mean, some of it's good, some of it's trying very hard, some of it is, hedge funds. That certainly happened in Denver too. The Denver Post got sucked into that, and a lot of the Hartford Courant, where I once worked, that's sort of gone. And that was a great regional paper at one point.
Paper.
So, I think the demand needs to be there and the willingness to pay. And I don't think that's an unfair kind of request.
No, but I think a lot of people listening, and you've got a very robust audience for us this time of day. A lot of people listening, 1,000% agree with you, but like chicken and egg, right? Like what there should be is some entity that would say, and they used to do this in the 19th century, okay, subscribe to this project. When we reach a certain amount of money, we'll hire a bunch of, local reporters and have this website and you'll get your local news. But that doesn't exist. I mean, where will people in Seattle or people who used to read the Hartford Courant, go to get
there? Yeah. Well, Seattle actually still has a strong regional paper. But Hartford, a lot of my former colleagues at the Hartford Courant, and it's been decades since I've been there, but they started something called the Connecticut Mirror, and it's pretty successful, and they have a lot of credibility. People know their bylines. And so, there are alternatives out there, and some philanthropists are kicking in money for it. But it's community by community. And I think communities need to ask for it and be willing, as I said, to pay for it. It's not the end all and be all, but I think it's one way to look inward about where are you putting your discretionary money. And the coffee thing drives me nuts, to be honest with you.
No, but I wouldn't torment yourself, because I think in my experience, and guys in the comments tell me if I'm wrong, I think, thousands of people listening to this podcast would happily trade their Starbucks run for a source of reliable local independent news. Right. Look, I just have to address the elephant in the room, Miranda, but you know who I am and what my background is. In my experience, a lot of legacy media, including local media, if there were such a pitch, right, has lost a lot of credibility, not covering giant stories or telling people who, like me, who tried to cover giant stories, that we were conspiracy theorists. So there's some healing to be done in the world of journalism with the audience, in my opinion. I wonder what you would say about that.
I agree with you. I think that I can't really, for example, talk about the Washington Post now. It's in such disarray. But I think that the best thing large and legacy media organizations can do is be transparent about their methods. And when they screw up, own up to it and fix it quickly. And right, which doesn't always happen.
It used to be called journalism, right?
And I think there are still some legacy media organizations out there that are doing some pretty amazing stuff. I think you have to be a smart consumer, though. And so there isn't any one source of information that I look at. I look at multiple ones. And I have to say, I also read the Financial Times in London online, and it's pretty good. And it covers America in a very interesting way. So, but I think you have to be discriminating and discerning, but news organizations need to be way more transparent, I think, about their methods. I think people that, when a story says so-and-so in the Trump administration did not respond for comment, and, we wrote the story anyway. Okay. But, for example, what does that really mean? And also, I think, analyzing why public officials aren't talking to the media now, which they are not. And that's nationwide. It's not just the federal government. And they're sort of getting away with it. And I'm like, I think, again, public demand is very important. And when I was at the Post, people would complain. And we listen to them. I mean, you have to take in people in the public and hear them out, even if you can't agree with them.
I hear you.
You think it's pie in the sky, huh?
Well, no. I mean, I'm sure look, my, children's father worked at the Post, and I was a, Washington Post spouse for a while. But I don't. How can I put it? We don't have this, I didn't say up front that I wanted to talk about this issue, so I don't mean to drag you into this argument.
Okay. I'm cool with it.
But no, it's just, I think what people, at least in my audience, are thinking, I don't want to speak for them, is you guys were, not you guys, but legacy media was wrong about lockdowns. Legacy media was wrong about Fauci. Legacy media was wrong about the Hunter Biden laptop story. Legacy media was, wrong about the origin of the Wuhan lab leak, like so many examples of big, important stories in the last 5 or 6 years, especially. Legacy media has consistently gotten wrong, and didn't just get wrong, but labeled people who tried to raise important issues with evidence, like I did, labeled them in horrible ways, smeared them, colluded with the Biden administration in smearing them. I got a big settlement from, X and Meta Google for having been smeared, by legacy media outlets colluding with the Biden administration, or social media outlets, which, is where most people get their legacy media news these days. So, and I haven't seen the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal say, hey, mea culpa, we got these giant stories wrong. We did, horrible injustice to these very heroic people, who tried to bring matters of public importance to, R.F. Kennedy Jr. was called every name in the book, right? Like, very bad things were done by legacy media in the last 5 or 6 years, and there's been no soul searching about it. What you see is, let's move on, that's in the past, and you just don't get your audience back that way, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. No, I totally understand what you're saying, and I think, as I said, I think they have to be a whole lot more transparent, and when they're wrong, own up to it quickly. The particular issues that you mentioned, I don't feel fluent enough, frankly, to say yes or no to that. I'm certainly aware.
You don't know at this point if lockdowns were a bad idea, or where,
I haven't analyzed it, so let me say that. I will say this, that as an older person, which I am, you think about teachers in schools who are older, I don't know that there were any good solutions to any of that. But, it's certainly not my topic and not something I have studied. So I hesitate to respond.
I'm not going to force you to.
No. I get that.
But I do think people are hungry for a little common sense and accountability from legacy media. And there we definitely agree. So let's move on to what you're working on now in our last couple of minutes, and how people can help you in your very important mission.
Yeah. Thanks.
revealing these stories.
Yeah. So I my Substack, which comes out every Wednesday and is about state and local generally, although I have written some about federal secrecy. I am always looking for examples that people are struggling with close to home. And I certainly want to write about those examples. And I think that the more we can illuminate the problem of secrecy at the state and local level, the better off we will be. And that, you can never underestimate the value of publicity, whether even if it's in a Substack that, maybe thousands of people aren't reading yet, but public, people, elected officials, public officials who aren't elected, whatever, they don't like bad publicity. What I would say, bad, and I'm talking about fair and accurate publicity, but I'm saying that they view it as bad. And so I think people need to understand the kind of power that they have actually if they can get the word out. So I am eager to get the word out about whether it's an NDA or, some kind of corruption in your community or whatever. And so the Substack, as Naomi mentioned, is backroomdealssubstack.com. And I'd certainly like to hear from people. And of course, I want more subscribers. I'm doing it for free right now, just because I want this out there. As for another book, I'm thinking about that. But as you know, this is not something you take on lightly.
No, it's a lot. Well, it's so important that you're covering state and local state assemblies. Is that the subject of Backroom Deals?
Well, it's about the different forms that secrecy takes at the local level. For example, the one I have coming out tomorrow is actually about a U.S. Supreme Court decision, but it's about a case from Buffalo, New York, where this bookstore was surveilled by the FBI for a long time. And then when the people tried to get information about it after the case was closed and no charges were filed, they were stonewalled and have been stonewalled. And so, that's a local story. It has a federal element to it, obviously. But, I'm looking around for real life examples where people are up against it, need help, trying to crack the code. So that's what I'm kind of looking for.
So your inbox must be very crowded. Are you saying people can contact you with
absolutely. And I do respond. So
do you want to
sure.
give people?
Well, and I'm very old school because it's a Yahoo address, but it's my name, which you can see here. You got to spell it correctly. A lot of people misspell Spivak, but it's Miranda Spivak at yahoo.com. And I do read them all and I respond and yes, and a crowded inbox is a good thing.
How amazing. You guys, I can't stress this enough. If, Miranda is absolutely right. You get the media you are willing to pay for and that you're willing to support. And if you've got a story about, opacity at the state or local level that happened to you or that you know about, contact Miranda. She's willing to look into it. In a way, Miranda, I think you're taking the place of some of those missing local news outlets with your
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I can't do everything, but I also know journalists around the country who might help as well. So amazing. Well,
I think it's so important. If there's anything I can do or that we can do to help you in this critical mission, please tell us. And in the meantime, please consider this platform always open to you when you do have news stories. And Autumn Smith says, this woman speaks truth. Absolutely. and what you're doing is just so critical. So I'm going to humbly say, you can have a free Substack, but put a donations link or
there is a donations link.
So people, don't be shy. Everyone go send her your coffee money. Seriously, she needs it to do this important work. She's too polite to tell you, but I will tell you for her. You can't run a journalism site of any seriousness at all without resources. And you really need to dig as deep as you can to help Ms. Spivak with this critical job. All right. I'm so grateful to you for coming on board. I'm going to, unless there's any final words or place that they should order your book, say it now. And then
well, okay. So bookshop.org is always good. If you know that, they support independent bookstores. And you can actually also still order the book from the publisher, which is thenewpress.org. You can get it directly from them. And there is an audiobook and there is, an electronic version. So, and I really am interested in reader feedback and hearing from people. And I, hope to write as much as I can that exposes these problems. And thank you, Naomi, for giving me the platform.
Thank you so much for joining us. An absolute delight. And so I'm going to remove you now and thank our sponsors. Love this interview. Thank you for what you're doing. I'll see you next time.
Okay.
Wow, what an important story. All right, you guys, you know what to do. You've got to support people who are supporting you, and especially people who are doing local journalism. So we really want to thank our sponsors, without whose fabulous products we would not exist. Something I've been thinking about as we've been having these conversations is not just what's happening in our institutions or in the economy, but also what people do with their awareness that there is this level of corruption out there. I hear from a lot of people who see that level of corruption and understand the risks in the economy, the instability, the loss of trust in our institutions, yet when it comes to their own savings or retirement, are still tied to these same systems. It's not usually due to a lack of understanding, but more it's hesitation. It's that space between their knowing something and deciding to act on it. And sometimes people look back with regret on not having acted when they know that keeping all your money in a very, fragile and kind of not stably based economic system is quite risky. That's my judgment. So what I'm noticing is that more people are starting to shift their thinking from trying to predict every outcome in the economy to asking very simply, how exposed am I? That's what Brian and I did when we decided to direct some of our savings into investing in gold or precious metals. I've been speaking with Augusta Precious Metals about this issue. What I appreciate is that they really approach it from an educational perspective. They take time to walk people through how investing in gold works, what to consider, whether it even makes sense for that individual. And they do this without any pressure. If you want to look into this more carefully, go to dailycloutgold.com, dailycloutgold.com, or text clout to 35052, and ask for Augusta's free information kit. It's a way to understand your options more clearly so that when you do make a decision, it's coming from a place of understanding, not hesitation. And the Wellness Company, independent journalists are reporting on energy lockdowns taking place in the EU and Australia, with the official narrative being that this is because of the Iran war and reduced oil supplies. Also, the FBI is investigating reports of potential sleeper cells in the US, even alleged plots targeting major cities and public events. Many Americans are raising serious concerns. Could this situation escalate and begin to disrupt everyday life, including access to basic medications? We've already seen how fragile supply chains can be during COVID. Oil is the backbone of everything we use and consume daily. When conflict hits, 80% of the medications America sources from overseas can become scarce very quickly. And we saw this. Brian and I saw that we couldn't get painkillers without a lot of intervention when I came out of the hospital. It was scary. That's why being prepped with a medical emergency kit really matters. The Wellness Company offers a doctor-prescribed kit with 8 core medications every American should have on hand, including antibiotics, ivermectin, and more, delivered directly to your door. It's designed to help treat common conditions such as UTIs, pneumonia, strep throat, and 25 other conditions. Are you concerned about expiration date? Google this military study, PMC 704-0264, and you'll learn something new about the scam of expiration dates, according to this study. You can't buy this kit at a pharmacy. You purchase your kit completely digitally. You just fill out a medical questionnaire, a licensed doctor reviews it, and fills the prescriptions. Headlines can be confusing during times of conflict, but the emergencies that we often face are everyday situations that we really shouldn't take for granted. because things can change so quickly. Head over to dailyclouthealth.com and use code dailyclout to save up to $30 off and get free shipping. Again, that's dailyclouthealth.com. Use code dailyclout, save up to $30 off and get free shipping. I can't stress this enough. By the way, kits are just available to US residents. Brian and I are so relieved that we have our TWC medical kit. We take it with us when we travel. And it's really saved us a few times, whether it was, a finger getting infected, on a long holiday weekend, difficult to get to a hospital. I won't discuss UTIs, but they happen. Pneumonia, like you really need those antibiotics sometimes. And it just is so empowering to know that you're not dependent on getting to a clinic, reaching a doctor, going to physically see someone. It's just right there in your home, and you can treat these things yourselves. It's hugely empowering, really reassuring. So please go make that call right now. It seems like an investment up front, but Brian and I have saved hundreds of dollars off of doctor's visits. All right, you guys, I love you to bits. I'll see you very soon. Remember what we talked about. You get the journalism you support. So please go over to Substack, to Outspoken, and subscribe. I have like 109,000 readers, free subscribers, and 5% of them are paying subscribers. I think, others can afford to pay, and I'm asking you to, because that's how we keep our doors open. That's how we keep going. It's not just me, it's my team. And also Daily Clout, you've got to subscribe to that. And then you can also subscribe to billcam.com and legisector.com to follow state and federal legislation, to change legislation that affects you and your family from your phone. An incredible resource. Love you guys. I'll see you soon. And thank you for watching Outspoken. Take care, everyone.